Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We'll just take a few moments for all the participants to start joining into the webinar. Webinar attendees are slowly filtering in now. Just give a few more moments for those of you who just joined, just to make sure that we give everybody a chance to join before we start the webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip J. Corner. I'm the Secretary of the IET West Yorkshire Network. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar, A Shift in Approach Due to COVID-19, What is Here to Stay. A few admin points before I introduce our speaker. This IET webinar, for those of you who haven't attended a Zoom webinar with the IET before, it will be a presentation by Dr. Craig Evans, followed by a Q&A session. The Q&A is text-based, so if you will see toward the bottom of your screen, you will have the option to select a Q&A button, and you can type your questions into the Q&A box there to submit them. There is also a chat function. I would request that participants please minimize the use of the chat function. If you're having a problem with the webinar that we may be able to help you answer, you can use the chat function there. I'd ask you to be considerate and avoid distracting the speaker and other participants by overuse of the chat. Few admin points just to touch on before we get started then. This webinar does provide 1 hour's CPD. For those of you who need a CPD certificate for this, it's self-service essentially. So I will post a link in the chat now, which will allow you to download a blank CPD certificate for this event, which you can then put your name into if you require that for your professional development records. Even if you're an IET member, unfortunately, the CPD for this event does not automatically get put into your career manager. You have to still do that yourself. So the link is in the chat now for your CPD certificates. If you have any problems with that, you can let me know. You can contact the West Yorkshire Network after the webinar. The IET is also doing a survey at the minute that's aimed to try and help us collate some more information about the demographic of people who are attending webinars and try and improve our webinars and our in-person events when we're able to return to them. So I'm going to post a link in the chat to our webinar survey as well. And I'd appreciate if you have time to complete that quick survey. It only takes a few minutes. That would really help us in improving events across the IET in the future. And then as a final note, for those of you who are particularly interested in electrical engineering power systems, just want to highlight as a quick plug, we also have an upcoming webinar on the 12th of October on high voltage DC interconnectors. So we'd really love it if you check that out. As usual, the details are on the events.theiet.org website. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Craig Evans. Dr. Evans is the Director of Student Education in the School of Electronic and Electrical Engineering at the University of Leeds. And he's the Programme Manager for Electronics and Computer Engineering degree programmes. He is a Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. He is also the Teaching Enhancement Project Leader at the Leeds Institute of Teaching Excellence and sits on the Faculty of Engineering Blended Learning Digital Education Committee and is a founding member of the Teaching and Learning in Engineering Network. So without further ado, Dr. Evans, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, I just want to say thank you to the West Yorkshire Network for inviting me to give this talk today. I was going to share some of our experiences and lessons we've learned during the pandemic. You know, what our kind of plans for the future are being in higher education. Just a quick overview of what we'll cover today. So I'll just start off with a brief background to the school and to the university, just to give you an idea of the kind of context that we started the pandemic in, and then some details about our kind of initial pivots to online when the pandemic started. We did all panic at the start of the pandemic. When the pandemic started in March, and then in summer 2020, we had to redesign our programs ahead of the new academic year for online delivery. So I'll say how we did that, our new approach to assessment. And then now what we've been doing this summer is reflecting back on what, how it went last year and what our plans will be going forwards. And I also want to cover some issues of academic malpractice, because that's been one of the key kind of experiences, unfortunately, during the pandemic. And then at the end, there'll be times for the Q&A. So I think you can post Q&A in the chat, in the Q&A box. But if you do want to post questions during the presentation, I will try and answer them as we go along. Just a bit of brief background about the University of Leeds, if you're not already aware. So a big university, so nearly 40,000 students. So it's 28,000 UG undergraduate students, and then 10,000 PGT students. So that's MSc students. And you can see there's 12,000 international students. So that's obviously had some issues this year during the pandemic. Our students all around the globe, different time zones, different different levels of internet access and so on. We've got about 9,000 staff as well. So the university is a member of the Russell Group. So this is a kind of group of research intensive universities in the UK. And the university as well has also already got an established digital education service, or DES. So before the pandemic, it was lucky in the sense that we did have a lot of experience of digital education, online learning, running online courses and so on, which obviously helped during the pivot to online learning. So a bit about the school of electronic and electrical engineering. So we've got about 650 students in total. That's across our undergraduate programs. So B-Eng and M-Eng programs, which I should say are accredited by the IET. And then we've also got several MSc PG programs as well. So we've got 44 academic staff. And then we also run some of our programs at the joint school at Southwest Jiao Tong University in Chengdu in China, which is actually undergoing its accreditation next month. So it's IET accreditation will take place next month. So again, that's always added some logistical difficulties to delivery, because of delivering to students in Leeds, in the UK, and in China as well. So I'll just find some details of the league tables. So the Times 100 Times Good University Guide 2021 with top 10 in the UK. And, the school's also got a long and proud tradition for research, and was in the top 5 in the UK for research for the latest ref. But I think it was actually second for electronic engineering. I think that unit of assessment included some other, I think that material science as well. That's a brief background about the school. So we'll look at what happened at the initial pivot. So as I kind of misspoke at the beginning, I said panic, but there was panic. So obviously kind of March 2020 kind of came out of the blue a little bit. We had to close the campus very quickly. It was literally got an email, we'll be closing, collect things from your office. You'll be working at home for the foreseeable, the teacher will be online. So it was, quickly shifting to online lectures. So as I said at the beginning, we've got the digital education service, and we've got lots of existing digital tools which kind of helped at this point. So we use Blackboard Collaborate for carrying on doing online lectures. Unfortunately, we had to cancel some labs and some assessments. This weren't practical to deliver those online, but we could continue some practical work. We do lots of modules, digital electronics, embedded systems and so on. We would typically give students a kind of development board and access to kind of sensors and components and so on, so they can work at home. We kind of did that before the pandemic, so that meant the students who had those boards, they can continue to work at home, which was useful. So all our major projects, we had to kind of quickly rescope them, so the students had to shift. They might have been kind of lab-based projects, but they had to be kind of rescoped to become more about design and simulation rather than doing practical work. And then in the May-June assessment period, there normally be obviously closed book exams, but they're all cancelled. They're all cancelled obviously because of the pandemic. We kind of went for a kind of 10-day coursework assignment. You might have seen a lot in the news about the 48-hour open book online exams. but we decided to go for more coursework assessment rather than exams. So that, you know, the initial pivot was relatively successful. I think everyone knew was in kind of panic mode, was trying to get through complete delivery while still kind of maintaining academic standards. And I think we did that. I think we did as well as we could be expected to, really. But obviously we got to summer then, and then we could kind of reflect on our approach, what went well, what we need to improve, and so on. So we talk about redesigning all of our modules for online delivery, because we knew that obviously the 2021 academic year will be online, or predominantly online. So with DES, the Digital Education Service, you know, through their experience of running online courses before, they had a set of principles called the Scala principles. So this is a student-centered active learning approach. So that this kind of Scala approach is split into four main frameworks, really. There's a learning journey. So with an online course, the students need to be very clear what's expected of them and when. The student support as well, we need to provide. Just because it's online doesn't mean the students are not going to get any support. We just need to find different ways of supporting students. And we obviously need to change the ways of assessment and feedback for online delivery, as well as how we deliver our content. So with these kind of principles of Scala in mind, we went about redesigning our entire program. So this is, I think we've got something like 70 or 80 modules. So it was a lot of work for all the academic staff in the school to redesign all the modules. So we used a unit approach. So this is where we kind of split units down into these 4 units, particularly based around topics or based around learning outcomes. So we could say this unit is going to cover this topic which meets this learning outcome. And then there was an assessment at the end of each unit. So that was actually a very good opportunity for people to look at their module, just to make sure that they're properly assessing the modules and the learning outcomes. And then we kept, you know, the final unit assessment was greater than 30%, because those of you may be aware of the IET accreditation requirements. It means that a student has to attempt, you know, they have to pass any assessment what's weighted higher than 30%. Because this keeps, you know, this will keep engagement high throughout the module. I was a bit worried it might get to the point maybe, you know, two-thirds of the way through the module with this continuous assessment, students might have already passed the module, and then they might just give up and say, I'm not going to bother doing this last unit because I've already passed the module. So it's important we kept this final unit weight greater than this, so it meant that students had to pass this assessment to pass the module. So in terms of the content delivery with Scala, we predominantly used asynchronous resources. So these are mainly screencasts, or so staff filmed, you know, went back through all the kind of traditional lecture slides, split them down into different topics, and filmed the screencasts. So the idea was then that students would watch the screencast and then attend an interactive online live session. So this was predominantly using Teams or Blackboard Collaborate. So rather than attending a session and just watching someone deliver slides just like you're doing now, it would be, you know, students would watch screencasts of the kind of content delivery and then attend an interactive session. We could split into breakout groups, work through examples, have discussions and so on. And then outside of those sessions, we gave support via discussion boards and surgery calls on Teams. So with our Blackboard platform, it's very easy to set up discussion boards. So it's kind of encouraging students to ask questions whenever they had them. And we could answer via discussion boards, or if there's things that couldn't really be solved, then the students could book one-to-one Teams calls where they could do screen sharing and things. So that was a very good way of providing support. And then we also used home lab kits for some practical modules. So we didn't want everything to be online. For some modules where it might just be theoretical modules, maybe, you know, you can run that online quite easily, really. And then some lab modules, if it's a software lab, it's not too much problem. Students can install the software at home. But for practical modules, we still wanted students to build electronic circuits. So we developed some home lab kits. So I was quickly going to go through the kind of delivery method for these. So this is for a lecture module. So the idea at the start of this unit, the students will watch some asynchronous resources. So as I said, that might be screencasts, could be reading some books, or listening to podcasts, or doing some kind of simulation, some kind of following some kind of animation or something. So there's lots of asynchronous resources. So the students would watch those in their own time. And then at the end of that, there was some formative feedback quizzes. So these, this gives the students an opportunity to quickly see if they kind of understood that material, and it also gave us an opportunity to monitor the students' engagement so we could track who was completing these quizzes. Following that, they've kind of prepared themselves for the synchronous sessions. That's some kind of live session, predominantly on Teams or Collaborate, as I said. It's important to note these are not really online lectures. These are examples classes, seminars, discussion boards, interactive things with polling. So we didn't want to just, do a traditional lecture online. We thought this is an opportunity to actually improve the students' learning so they become active participants in their learning rather than just passive participants. And then following, the end of the unit, there was some summative assessment on the topics our learning outcomes covered in that unit. And then throughout the unit, whenever the students needed additional support, they could post on the discussion board or book in for these one-to-one support calls. So that's what we'd call the unit, and this was repeated, several times throughout the modules. This is for a lab. This is for more like a lab module. So there's no real synchronous delivery in that regard. There's no live lab sessions. The expectation was students would do the activity in their own time, but then there's much more opportunity then via the surgeries. So they'll be trying to do some activity, asking questions in the discussion board, and they got stuck or booking in support calls. So that's, hopefully that give you a bit of an idea of our approach. So this is compared to maybe before, where there might be labs, say lectures throughout the semester, maybe 1 or 2 problem sheets throughout the semester, and then a large weighted exam at the end of the module. Because in that kind of previous scenario, students would often maybe not attend lectures consistent throughout the semester, and they could know that they can just kind of cram in the summer before the exams. So I wanted to kind of avoid that situation with this online delivery and this kind of continuous assessment throughout the year, but encourage students to keep engaged with the studies.
Dr. Evans, I have just got a question here from a participant that might be applicable just to look at from that slide. So Gordon Hunter has asked, did you find that most students engaged well with the online resources, both synchronous and asynchronous?
It depends what you mean by most, basically. I think it was a mixed bag. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But some students did. Some students would come to the session well prepared, and they would kind of engage in the session. It was much more not really kind of cameras off, mics off, interacting via the chat. But yeah, so that was good in that regard. I think those sessions were much more interactive than a traditional lecture. But there were some students, unfortunately, who didn't really they weren't organised enough, basically, I think, to kind of watch the asynchronous resources before attending these synchronous sessions. I will briefly mention that later. This is a picture of the lab kit. So these were this was a lot of work last summer preparing these. So we give all the incoming students a picoscope. So I don't know if you've seen these as small USB devices you can connect to your PC, and then they act like an oscilloscope function generator. We made various custom kits for providing power to students safely, motor control, wireless communications. Also those kind of digital electronics embedded systems modules we gave microcontroller and FPGA development boards. So this is an example from one of our level 1 modules, the electronic design project. This is actually a group project. We did run it as a group project last year. So these kits were kind of sent out. So I hope, you know, the groups are kind of constructed in a way that there's always going to be some members of the groups in Leeds, so you could come into the school. And then others who are online could kind of join in the group design project in different ways, so designing circuits, writing code, and so on. You can see this is just a very simple wireless remote control buggy. You can see the H bridge if you look closely on the breadboard on the right. Yeah, so the top left there is a power board. One of the members of staff designs. That gives students plus or minus. I think it's 5 volts, plus or minus 6 volts, and plus or minus 9 volts. I think I can't really remember. So that enabled, because there's also lab kits for the kind of traditional analog electronics modules. So we give them a bunch of components. They could build, you know, op-amp circuits and things with a kind of plus and minus supply here, and then measure the, measure the waveforms using the picoscope on the computer. And then there was the motor control board. That was for the I think it's called sensors and actuators module. So students could program the stepper motor servo motor to create some kind of anima mechatronic devices. So students really appreciated those lab kits, because it wasn't just death by video. You know, they were doing some practical work as well. And on top of that, we do have a lot of labs that are software based, so they could kind of run as normal. So it wasn't just watching videos. You know, students were very active doing lots of different activities. So in terms of the assessment, we obviously had to change that quite a lot. It was all online tests and our coursework. So we kind of went for this kind of fixed duration, flexible time test that was based around inclusivity and accessibility. So the test might be open for a 48-hour period, and then the students, you know, would start the test when it's convenient, and then they'd have like 2 hours to complete the test. So that obviously helps when people are, you know, in different time zones, or they might be they might have childcare responsibilities, or they might live in a house where it's might be busy or loud, and it's hard to find time to do, find quiet time. So that was the idea of that. But we did also do some fixed duration, fixed time tests. So this is where the test takes place at a specific time for all students. So typically these were early, like 9 AM UK time, to enable the students. We have lots of students from China, for example, so they can do the tests, decent time for them. I think it's normally about 5 PM or something like that in China. And we had minimal use of 48-hour exams. You might have seen in the media this kind of open book 48-hour exams seem to be quite popular, but we always had some concerns about the robustness of those methods. So we did try and prevent academic malpractice. So question values, it wouldn't just be solve this particular question. The numbers, what go into those problems might have come from the student's ID number, or using question banks, so different students get different questions, or asking students to come up with their own illustrative examples. So in my module, for example, in the level 1 digital electronics module, maybe in the past, you give students a kind of truth table and say, work out the SOP expression and simplified expression for this truth table. But just to try and mix it up a little bit, they kind of give students an empty truth table. So right, you need to put 4 ones randomly in this truth table, and then kind of simplify it, that kind of thing, just to try and make it a bit harder for students to copy off each other. We also try to focus on the higher levels of Bloom taxonomy. So more mini projects, more case studies, more design exercises. So rather than the kind of questions you might see in closed book exams, you could tell that was more suited to open book assessments, less susceptible to chegging. So if you've not heard of chegging, I'll cover that more later. So we haven't really heard of chegg before the pandemic, unfortunately, but now we know what it is. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. So if you look at the bottom levels, So, you know, closed book exams often kind of focus on these lower levels, really remembering, understanding principles. But you can't really, obviously, in an online assessment, you can't really say to students, you know, get them to recall something or, you know, check that they've memorized something, because they've got access to the internet while they're doing those tests. You know, even when they ask them to explain something, you can just quickly Google something and they can get an explanation. Even, you know, so we kind of did try and do more project work and case studies, what focus on these kind of higher order cognitive skills. So I think it's actually a more authentic assessment actually than what we did in the past. So that, you know, we just, well, we got to the end of that year in July. So when we look back, you know, with overall it went very well actually, I think, the year. There were some complaints about lack of face-to-face teaching. I've obviously seen lots of stuff in the media, petitions and so on. But I think predominantly really those complaints came from level 1 students who probably they'd obviously not been to university before. Well, in most cases, wouldn't have been to university before and kind of thought they were missing out by not having lectures. But then those of us in academia, when you look back before the pandemic and you're lecturing to kind of half-empty lecture theatre because people are not bothering to attend, you know, we've kind of known for a long while that lectures are not particularly, might not be the best way to teach some modules. You know, so because students in the, you know, finalists in particular, the higher level students, you know, often said they preferred this kind of learning. You know, they much preferred it to coming into lectures. It was more convenient. So there were lots of positives to online learning. You know, the home lab kits were appreciated. You know, students really enjoyed using those. But despite wanting more face-to-face teaching, they actually didn't want face-to-face assessment. You know, they want to keep online assessment, but they did say that was too much assessment. You know, so in this upcoming year, we'll be reducing the number of units and modules, you know, to give less assessment. And as Gordon's question said before about engagement, you know, some students, again, it was particular level 1, level 2 students really hadn't quite developed the time management skills at that point, a bit overwhelmed, I think, really, especially level 1 students who arrive at university. It's a big, you know, it's tough enough without a pandemic, and the struggle with time management, juggling, you know, what they needed to do. But again, the feedback from the 3rd and 4th years was very positive. You know, they tend to like this, find it much more, I think they're better able, have better soft skills to deal with this. And it's actually, I think the NSS results are not public yet, but, you know, if you look across the sector, the NSS results kind of fell basically this year, but ours improved quite significantly. So we're quite happy with that. We was, you know, I'm not going to lie, it was a bit unexpected, but our NSS results have actually improved on the back of this, which we're very happy about. As I've kind of hinted at a couple of times, academic malpractice has been a big problem when we look back on this year. So it's obviously going to, you know, something we need to look at going forwards. So I'll just spend a bit of time on this. I don't know if there's many people from academia here, but we had significantly higher number of cases this year. So this is just in our school. So this is in the School of Electronic and Electrical Engineering. We had about 100 cases where we caught students plagiarising or colluding, and that actually led to 16 exclusions, what's just absolutely unprecedented. So in a normal year, you might get maybe 1 student excluded for some kind of serious academic malpractice offence. So to have 16 since the start of the pandemic is just, you know, unprecedented. And it's not just our school. You know, other schools are starting to feel that now. We have the continuous assessment, so we're kind of catching people cheating really at the start of the year. But then schools where they kept more of the kind of summative assessment to the end of the year, you know, throughout the year, it didn't seem that they had a problem because they weren't really doing much assessment then. But then when it gets to the summer and the assessment period starts, you know, that's when the kind of, obviously the academic malpractice starts to occur. It seems the biggest issue was with chegg.com. So you might have heard of that before since the pandemic, because before the pandemic we weren't really aware of Chegg. I've looked, it's an American company. I think it's also got a base in India. If you Google the Chegg's share price, you'll see how much the share price has increased during the pandemic. And then we've also found issues with tutoring and freelancers. So this is the students employing tutors to do their assignments for them, and even employing freelancers to do their project work for them. And in some cases, that's been contacted by freelancers. You know, so, unfortunately, letting you know that one of your students has kind of approached me to do the project for them, paying hundreds, if not thousands of pounds to get somebody else to do their work for them. So see, these are some of the websites, if you're not aware of, it's probably worth looking on there to see, if you can find any of your assessments on there if you're from academia. So this is Chegg. This is a website. As you can see there, a smarter way to student. So it's got this expert Q&A session, expert Q&A section. So this is mainly, Chegg's predominantly for STEM subjects. So you can see there, they take a photo of the question and you can get an answer in as little as 30 minutes, which even with online tests isn't good. Students will take pictures of the questions during a test. You can get the answer back before the end of the test and then submit that. But the scale of this is shocking, really. I didn't really know too much about Chegg before the start, but you can see there are 21 million solutions are posted on the Chegg website. So it's only $15 a month for students to sign up. They can use the expert Q&A, as I said, post questions. So it's worth looking at. I've put the link to the archive, so you can check the expert Q&A. There's like a calendar, so you can see the questions that are posted each day. So you can see that I checked on Friday, test last Friday, so it's 2,010 questions posted just on Friday. So that's the scale of it. This is from universities all around the world. So really, you need to be searching Chegg during these assessment periods, and it's very disheartening actually when you find your assessment. I found several of mine this year. Obviously put a long time into writing assessments, and then you find the entire thing published on the internet, and people are answering those questions so the students can cheat. It's very, very disheartening. I've just got a quick tip there for anyone who's what I found useful, adding question references, because when students submit, when they submit these photographs, there's some kind of optical character recognition. So that will, make the question, you can search for it digitally. So you can search for the text of your question, but there's that many on there, it can be hard to find your exact question, because if you search for Carnot map or something, there's going to be thousands of questions with Carnot maps. So just making up a random question reference and putting that in the question paper. When students take a picture, that reference will appear, so it makes it much easier to find them. So this is an example. This is us on Friday. This was not one of my questions. I just quickly grabbed one of those 2,000 questions. So that's the kind of thing. Students will just take a photo using the smartphone typically and upload it to Chegg. And you can see at the top where it says function GS, your task is to design a compensator. So it picks out the text. And then, one of these experts will answer the question. And students can obviously get the answer then and use that to answer the question. But Chegg does have an honor code, which was very useful. So you can request, if you're at university and you find one of your questions posted, you can request account information for those who posted the question and viewed the question. And then Chegg will send back, all the logs, so names, dates, email addresses, IP addresses. So we use that to track down several students, because with our systems, we can also get students' IP addresses when they submit work. So you obviously can just cross-reference the students' IP addresses to IP addresses you get back from Chegg. Unfortunately, the university, as soon as you start paying for work, that's the university considers that an egregious offence and it will result in exclusion. And unfortunately, I've had 16 students excluded for those offences. So obviously, when you find, you need to be looking on Chegg. You can find your submitted answers. If you find your question, you can get the answers. So we've had to sign up to Chegg ourselves, create a Chegg account so we can get the answers. And then we can obviously compare them to the expert answer. All the students will submit their work. We've got the expert answer that appeared on Chegg, and then go through all the submissions to track down who's submitted. But it's quite amusing because these expert answers are often wrong. because I don't think, obviously not really experts. They're typically students themselves, actually, in a lot of cases. So they, it could be wrong, or they use different nomenclature, different units that we're taught in the module, different methods for solving problems. So it's normally pretty easy to spot when it's happened. So this is an example from one of my modules I found. So on the right, that's the image that was appeared on Chegg. That was the answer submitted by the expert. And on the left is the answer what was submitted by the student. So typically this, this stood out of it before I saw the Chegg thing for me, because with kernel maps, I typically use grey code rather than the min terms for labeling the cells. I would also draw it the other way. All the examples I've done is kind of like a vertical kernel map. So as soon as I saw this without the grey code and kind of drawn horizontally, and I'd also typically do kind of ovals around the ones rather than rectangles. So this looked a bit suspicious anyway. It weren't really done using the methods I taught the students. But you can see there, if you compare that to the submitted the submitted answer to the Chegg answer, the students copied it exactly. They've probably got that little understanding that they don't even know how to kind of disguise it. They just copied it, even the kind of little right angle and the arrow for when they're labeling the expression. They've copied it exactly. They don't want to change anything of the expert answer in the case they lose the meaning. And I thought, so that's, that was a big problem this year, which we need to kind of bear in mind going forwards. So we'll look at our plans for this upcoming year and beyond. So this year, well, this month, we're returning to campus for labs, seminars, and examples classes. So all these on-campus sessions, not the labs, obviously, will be live streamed and recorded. So before the pandemic, Leeds had a lecture capture system, so all lectures were kind of recorded anyway, and then posted online. So that system will come back into place, and then also be live streamed on Teams. So if students don't attend on campus, they'll be able to join in remotely. All Lloyd's lectures will be online. There's still kind of capacity restrictions in lecture theatres, so for Lloyd's lectures, students will all fit in. So in terms of the overall approach, we're going to keep this active learning approach. We're not going to go back to traditional lectures. We've made all these kind of asynchronous resources this year, and we're going to utilise those so they're much more active learning and move more towards this flipped classroom approach. So this is where, well, similar to last year, but rather than attending seminars and examples classes online, students will be able to come onto campus to attend those type of sessions, and obviously come to the labs to carry out the lab activities. We'll keep discussion boards and Teams for online support. That worked very well. It's a very good way to provide, so students actually now have got much access to much more support than they did before the pandemic. I think a lot of it is just getting that messaging across to students who just automatically feel like they've kind of been missing out, or they've been, the pandemic's given them a worse education. So we need to kind of get the message right to make them understand that actually this is improving your education. It's not, we're not doing it because it's cheap and easy, because it's not cheap and easy. So we can actually provide more support than normal to students. And we're going to continue using these lab kits. They work very well. So then going forward for the labs, what can do that? Maybe in the past, the student might miss a lab session because they were ill, or they just didn't get up in time or whatever. And then it'll be struggling to catch up with the lab. But when they've got the lab kits, they can do the work at home. And obviously, especially this year, we need to be a bit more robust. The pandemic, we look at the cases creeping up. Although the government says there's going to be no lockdown, I think we do need to be prudent and plan for some kind of, shift back to online. If cases, we come back to campus and cases start going through the roof, then we do need to be ready to go back to fully online. So this kind of hybrid approach will let us do that, I think. So in terms of assessment, there's no return to closed book exams this year. Universities kind of read that out already. Well, there is some possibility of on-campus assessment under controlled conditions. So we could do, when we've got these kind of online quizzes and things, there's no reason why we can't do those in the labs under controlled conditions. So students could even be, still be open book. Students can still access the internet, but all the students just in the room so we can keep an eye on them, make sure they're not colluding or using Chegg and things like this. There's a clear thing that we need to get better at writing open book assessments. So you need to kind of write questions that are less checkable or even just less Googleable. So if you give all the for example, if you give all the information in the question, then someone on Chegg can just answer that. But then need to start maybe asking questions that rely on access to other resources. So when we've covered material in Screencast 105, for example, the person on Chegg won't have access to Screencast 105, or the student will have to try and get them access. So then in this 30 minutes, they've got to this expert will have to somehow get access to the resources, watch it, so that it gives them the information they need to answer the question. And also use more reflective questions as well. So, the answers are kind of personal to the students, not something they could just copy or adapt. You ask more reflection on their personal learning experience, and hopefully that will cut down on the rate of cheating we've seen. And also using journals and portfolios for project work. I started doing that last year for my modules that do projects, and that worked well. Because typically a student will do a project, and at the end of the project they will submit to reports. But then when you do that, you don't really know if they're the one who's been doing the work, or they've been, they paid a freelancer to do the work, and then they just created the report at the end. So if the students keep a journal and updating that week by week, you can see, you can see the project develop over the course of the project. It's not just buying a complete project offline. Related to software projects, that's a lot of my teaching is software related. I was using version control for that as well, so that's very useful if you do software assessments. Make a requirement that students must use version control using GitHub or something like that. So again, you can see the code develop over the course of several weeks rather than just copying code off the internet or buying it from a freelancer. I just want to briefly mention the AHET 4 learning outcomes while we're after this an IET webinar. So this is from the IET accreditation document about the move to AHET 4. AHET 4 does focus more on these higher level cognitive processes and less on remembering and understanding. So actually it does seem, in terms of accreditation as well, because I don't think we'll ever go back to fully closed book exams. They might return for some modules, but I think this kind of more authentic assessment, more project work and things will continue. And then it also ties in with these kind of higher order processes covered in the AHET 4 outcomes. But obviously there is a balance between coursework and exams, and that we'll have to go back to some exams, but maybe just not to the level that we did do previously. So there's Bloom's taxonomy again. So again, closed book exams tend to kind of focus on these lower order skills, should we say. So I think going forwards, we'll be focusing on the higher level of Bloom's taxonomy when we're creating our assessments. So that's it. Now, if there's any Q&As, if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer. Or if anybody from academia has got any kind of experience that want to share, any ideas for reducing academic malpractice or for writing open book assessments. So Leslie, yes, again, was very lucky at the university, because they got the digital education service. They have a lot of experience of running these online courses, lots of training available throughout the year on the new platforms we've been using. So staff were kind of encouraged to attend the training. And I think at the beginning, Philip mentioned, just before the pandemic, I was part of creating a network called Talent, the Teaching and Learning and Engineering Network. So we were kind of running local training events before the pandemic anyway, kind of sharing practice. But that kind of came into its own this last year. We've run lots of training sessions throughout the year.
There's some questions coming into the Q&A now. So I'd like to first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Evans, for the presentation. on behalf of the IET and the participants here. We haven't had many questions from participants in the Q&A, so please do feel free to put the questions in there. I do have a question here from participant Mark Hildred, which is a question that had occurred to me as well as on the way through. And he asks, how did you deal with digital poverty, i.e. students who may have slow broadband access, etc.? Obviously, some areas of the North are recognised as underprivileged areas, although the university obviously has quite a wide catchment. So would you care to answer that one, please?
Well, again, the university's got a scheme where students, well, for example, if a student's not got, the laptop's not very good or the laptop breaks, they can get a loan laptop from the university. So that applied for staff as well, I think, to get a work laptop. So there's that was quicker rolled out, so students could access a laptop. In terms of broadband, I'm not really too sure. I wasn't really sure of many cases of that. We did always chat to students, ask them, what's your internet like? Most people seem to say they didn't have a problem with broadband. But in terms of digital poverty, that is a big thing the university was very aware of, and it was there was loan laptops available for students. And we also made, because obviously when the labs were closed, our kind of lab PCs were sat basically being unused, so they were changed. IT reconfigured those, so they were made remotely accessible, so students could remote access the lab PCs to get access to the software and run the more powerful software packages. So if their laptop wasn't powerful enough at home to run some kind of CAD software, for example, they could just, well, assuming they got a good broadband connection, they can remote access into the lab PCs to run the software there.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Participant Steve Fannin asks if you used any IT solutions for engaging students collectively in tutorial and workshop sessions, e.g. a digital whiteboard?
Yeah, definitely that would, using the whiteboard in Teams is very common. So as part of that talent network, actually last summer, we gave staff, well, there's different options for staff to get access to different things. So, a little graphics tablet so you could write on things. So that was kind of doing that kind of thing, using breakout groups in Teams as well. So students would, you might get all the students into an examples class and use breakout rooms to put them into little groups so they could discuss their answers and then report back to the main room. And then an answer what's more kind of specific to my teaching with computer programming, there's a platform called Replit that might be worth checking out. That allows kind of live collaborative coding. So a bit like Google Docs or Office 365, where you can, multiple people can work on one file at the same time. So with REPL, you could do that as well with coding. So you could kind of share a link to the online ID. Essentially, students could join that link and you could write code together and things. So that was very, those things were actually much better than the way we did things before the pandemic.
So Rob Finian asks, how has it affected course capacity? For example, can you teach more students simultaneously than before with this online method?
If we wanted to do online, but we don't really want to, we're not shifting to online fully. We are doing labs. This last year was a one-off basis to be fully online. And now we're back on campus and running labs. We have got capacity limits, so we've probably, just done the admissions for this year, so we have kept numbers pretty similar to the past. I don't think universities want to use online learning to recruit more students. I'm sure you've seen stuff in the news recently about, with grade inflation at A levels and so on, more students meeting offers, but for on-campus, for on-campus universities, there's limits of accommodation. The size of the campus is limited, so we won't be fully, we won't be using it to recruit more students.
I have another question here saying, could you give us an idea on how big the challenge was this year with plagiarism? And I presume this attendees and academic, they say we have some large groups who had shared answers.
Oh, it was a big, that's probably the biggest challenge, really. So that's what I've said with checking things like this. That needs to be part of practice going forward. It's not just releasing some test and then getting the answers in and marking them. You need to be monitoring, check. So it does, you know, for example, in these 48-hour periods, it's worth keeping an eye on check, you know, because you can see the questions throughout the day being posted and so on. So keeping an eye on check during these assessment periods to see if you can find your questions, and then comparing, you know, the answers that are submitted. But yeah, there's definite collusion going on, even with the tests. I think what typically seems to happen, you know, you might get 5 or 6 students who would all submit the same answer based on what came from Chegg. So what we'll do, one of the students will probably start the test at the start of the assessment period. They'll access the test so they can get copies of the questions. They'll just be posted on Chegg then. So then once they've got their answers from Chegg, they'll share it around with their friends who will then attempt the test later in the assessment period.
Thank you. And I have a question from a participant, Sue RY. Apologies if I haven't pronounced your name correctly. Overall, do you think online teaching lessons for engineering subjects are more or less suitable to be held when compared with other university subjects? What discipline is the most difficult to teach by an online mode?
I think STEM subjects are obviously difficult to deliver fully online. You know, last year we managed as a kind of contingency measure. But for, you know, I think of the colleagues across the faculty. So in Leeds, we've got the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences. For example, physics and chemistry, I think they're probably the most difficult, and mechanical actually. Because you know, in electronic engineering, when we say labs, some of our labs are just, you know, it's software labs, and that can be done online at home. With the kind of embedded type labs, we can give students access to development boards so they can do work at home. So we can kind of manage, but then with mech-eng, they've got some big manufacturing labs, but they can't replicate online. Obviously, with chemistry, you can't be posting chemistry sets around the world. You know, so I think for those type of subjects, it's more difficult. I think with electronics and computing similar. You know, when it's software, it works well, and in some ways it works better. You know, I think the sessions I did using the kind of interactive coding that worked. You know, they tended to work well. So I think we'll keep that kind of thing going forwards.
Okay, thank you. We have a few minutes of the webinar left. I'd just like to highlight for those who attended that the webinar has been recorded. Thank you to Dr. Evans for kind permission for that. The webinars are processed and then uploaded onto the IET Yorkshire YouTube channel. That can normally take a week or two for us to do that, but just for reference for any of you who want to catch up or had colleagues who wanted to view but couldn't attend. There aren't any more questions in the Q&A, but there are a few questions that I've had while I'm going through that I'll put to you, Dr. Evans. You mentioned about some of the software for the modules and some of the kind of software programming. Were there any challenges with licensing the software for making it available to students at home, or did you find that the academic licenses were already quite flexible?
We've not really come across many issues like that. We've got the remote access that helped around that, because there's some licenses need access to the VPN, for example. So students need to be on campus to, you know, typically students have to be on campus to use that software. You know, so maybe in the past some licenses were accessible via the VPN, but then making the lab PCs remotely accessible meant that students could log onto those to use, you know, to use those licenses. I think a lot of people do tend to use open source type platforms now when possible to avoid these licensing issues. And again, it's not just licensing, actually, it's cross-platform there, because, you know, we have lots of students who have Windows, lots of students who use Mac and so on. So I think people have been kind of quite careful in the last few years moving to platforms that are a bit more accessible. So we didn't really have too many particular problems with licensing last year.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, you mentioned in your presentation about version control for software programming and the use of Git and things like that. Is it something that you've considered applying that approach to assessments for things like technical reports and dissertations, where you ask students to submit their draft versions, not necessarily for review, but for the process of determining that, you know, the work is their own?
Well, we've kind of discussed it, but not really implemented it. But it is a good idea. We have thought about that, because I know on Word and stuff now there is kind of, you know, version control and things on Word. So it's something what we should, you know, we do need to look at, because some of the, some of the Word documents get submitted by students, and you look at it and it says total editing time 25 minutes. You can look in the metadata of the Word document. So check that to make sure, because sometimes students have submitted reports with somebody else's name as the author. The document's been created by a different author, and the editing time, you think you've obviously not written this report in 20 minutes. So I think we need, I think we need to look at that for reports as well.
There's a question. Yeah, sorry, Rob Finnegan was just asking about the remote collaboration tool that you mentioned. Yes, you can pop that in the chat to everyone. Yeah.
So that's a very nice coding platform. It used to be called REPL.it, but then now it's I think it's just, if you go to replit.com. So that supports lots and lots of languages. It's very nice because you can embed, you can write sample code in there, and you can act. We've got Blackboard. Blackboard's our virtual learning environment. So you can write code, you can write example code in REPL and then embed it in like an iframe using HTML. So all my coding resources now are kind of hosted in our Blackboard environment. Because it's online as well, students have to, I think that's what, in terms of software as well, a lot of staff try to do that, move to online platforms where possible. Because students are using their own devices. So it's, they often can't install software. So you have to spend, time helping students to install software, which isn't probably a good use of time, really. We want to be helping students with the kind of academic work rather than IT issues. So REPL, it's very nice. It's all browser based.
Excellent. So a final question I'll pose to you then, in the absence of any other Q&A before we finish. You mentioned obviously about the accreditation, in this case IET accreditation of courses, which is obviously something that universities consider to be quite important. Did you find that there were any challenges considering that? Obviously, normally these accreditations are quite lengthy and you submit your evidence of what and how you're going to teach in advance. What was your experience of accreditation and the challenges of the pandemic?
Well, we've got our next accreditation visits in this coming March. So I don't really envisage, now we've come back to campus, I kind of don't really envisage too many problems with that, really. We had to submit a response to the IET, after, well, we had to do it after last academic year, and I'll have to submit a response soon, a response to this year's. I think the issue what the IET raised was that in Leeds, for example, took the decision to cancel level 1 assessments. Because they thought level 1 doesn't contribute to the final degree classification. So the year of the pandemic, level 1 assessments were cancelled, closed book exam, all exams were cancelled. But luckily we cover the AHEP learning outcomes across the programme. So if the students were assessed in level 1, they could still meet those learning outcomes in the later years of study. So that seemed to be a big thing during the pandemic. Was it was the kind of cancellation of assessment, but hopefully that was just a one-off and won't happen again.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. So we're coming towards 1 o'clock UK time now, so I'm going to bring the webinar to an end. Let me close by saying thank you very much to Dr. Evans and the University of Leeds for this excellent presentation. And thank you very much to all of you who attended today for tuning in and following this. As Dr. Evans mentioned, if you have any feedback for him, particularly other academic institutions who might want to share knowledge and information and lessons learned, please feel free to contact him via the University of Leeds website. Thank you very much to everybody and have a good day and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.